Guys, if you could start with Emmett maybe and give us 90 seconds on what your journey in aviation has been to date and what brought you to today.
Well, I suppose from a very young age, as has been alluded to by other speakers today, I discovered I had a passion for aviation. So I suppose even during my school years, I was very focused on that path. Ultimately, I ended up going to UL, conducting and completing a undergraduate in aeronautical engineering. But my kind of passion was always actually to fly aircraft. So I ended up joining the Air Corps in 2002 and receiving my military pilot wings in 2004. The broad, expansive experience within the Air Corps has been involved with training. So from a very early stage, I received a flying instructor's rating, and I've been involved in training all our new intakes essentially for pilot training for a long time. After a number of years, I kind of exited that area, and I did a tour as a staff officer, but with responsibility again for training, but on an organisation level for the whole Air Corps. At that time, I also switched on to another aircraft type, so I got some operational experience in our CASA-CN 235 in the maritime and other roles. And then about 2 years ago, I went back into the flying training school as the chief flying instructor, where I've been working to date. During the period, I know it's been mentioned already, I went back and completed an MBA again in UL in the aviation management stream, and as well as my roles in the flying school in terms of check-in training standards, etc., and pilot development for its staff and students, I also am tasked with things like being a qualified weapons instructor and conducting low-level aerobatics display for the Air Corps on the PC-9.
Kyle.
Good afternoon. Again, from a young age, a passion for aircraft. At 14, I joined the Air Corps in the north and continued with that up until university. I went to Queen's University and was in the University Air Squadron for a number of years, and also was sponsored as an apprentice aerospace engineer with Shorts Bombardier in Belfast. In my last year at university, I was lucky enough that the Aer Lingus cadetship came up, and I was one of the lucky 18 to get selected. So I joined Aer Lingus in the late 90s. I went on to the turboprops, the Fokker 50, then moved on to the 737 where I was an instructor, and then on to the A330. And then in about 2006, after about 10 years in Aer Lingus, I moved into flight instruction. And I've led a varied career in that. I was from chief ground instructor to head of training, and I'm currently now working with the Atlantic Flight Centre down in Cork as a senior instructor on our Boeing 737 simulator, doing multi-crew jet orientation course, as well as covering the ground school for the ATPLs, and working closely with the IAA in developing the MPL course, which is another option then for students that will go through training programs to become an airline pilot.
Very good, thanks for that. And Garrod.
So my background started off quite similar to Emmett really, except that I, instead of going to university, first joined the Air Corps straight away. So I joined the Air Corps in 2006 and trained as a cadet pilot. After my cadet training, I started to fly operationally straight away. So I flew the Cessna aircraft for 2 years, mainly in support of the Army, and then flew the government jet, the Bombardier Learjet 45, under two Presidents McAleese and Higgins, which was a wonderful experience. And I suppose I saw a lot of flying into Europe and got to see the mix between military flying in Ireland, international flying, and have since then gone back to serve as a military flight instructor in the flying training school, working with Emmett. About a year and a half ago, I suppose from an entrepreneur point of view, I saw a different opportunity, which was to branch into unmanned aviation. So myself and a colleague, we set up iFly Technology, which is a drone education company. At the time, in Ireland, there was only one place to train for drones, and we created a ground school program, which is a 2-day course, and it's an IAA requirement to have a ground school course of training done. After that, we developed a flying training part of the school, and also we now carry out IAA certification on behalf of the IAA. We act as examiners, so we take people through that full the full journey, and we essentially created that last business opportunity because it was being done by the Irish Aviation Authority and thus privatised it. I'm also the operations officer for the Unmanned Aircraft Association of Ireland, so we represent commercial operators who wish to operate in Ireland, and anecdotally I'm the race director and organiser of the Irish Drone Racing National Championship, which is the sport which has been developed from the drone industry. So I suppose I've been lucky enough to have quite a varied experience in aviation through a vast variety of roles, both manned and unmanned, in quite a short period of time.
Thanks, Claude. Dermot?
Yep, my name is Dermot O'Riordan. I joined the Air Corps similar to the guys. I know it looks like a very Air Corps heavy panel, but I joined the Air Corps in 2001. I completed air traffic controller training in the UK, tower and radar control. I developed then to complete an instructor's course with the Eurocontrol Institute of Air Navigation Services in Luxembourg, completed an examiner with the Eurocontrol, flight procedures designer and aviation auditor courses. So since that, I've been heavily involved in training. We lost a lot of military air traffic controllers to the civil sector. So we've been very intensively training to try and regenerate the unit back to where it is now. So I was head of training for air traffic controller training in the Air Corps for a couple of years. Then I was second in command of the ATC unit, and for the past 4 years I've been head of the ATC unit in the Air Corps. We have a team of about up until we just recruited another couple of people, so we have a team of approximately 25 people operating on a 24-hour-a-day basis, operating from Casement Aerodrome Baldonnel, but also from Dublin International Airport, from the Civil ATC Centre there. We've got a military radar presence at the ATC Centre there. Privately, I've trained self-funded CPL instrument rating and a flight instructor's course, and I instruct out in Weston on a part-time basis. I developed the integrated course for the National Flight Centre out there, so I've done a bit of instruction in terms of the ATPL theoretical knowledge side, and similar to the guys, I completed an MBA within the past year, so that's pretty much me.
Very good. Thanks, Dermot. Steve, we're missing giving you a wrong title earlier. Sorry, it's People and Change Manager, Flight Operations. Apologies.
No problem. It was a promotion, I think, was it?
I think so.
No. I'm outnumbered. I've no Air Corps experience. So, 1998, I was finishing a degree in mechanical engineering in DIT, Bolton Street, and got the opportunity to head away, like Kyle, to Michigan. Aer Lingus offered me a cadetship to learn how to fly, which is something I always wanted to do. We came back and a good opportunity to fly a number of fleets, 146 initially, 737, A320 and A330. I had a spell as Vice President of the Pilot Association. And then in 2008 was offered a scholarship to complete a business degree in UCD. And as part of that scholarship, I may have promised too much in my interviews, and I was offered a position in management. I became head of HR for pilots and cabin crew through 2009, so a lot of change programs there, and post-IPO, so a lot of change going on there. And then I became head of the cabin crew department, the in-flight services department, which is very interesting. So that was through Greenfield with the change of CEO, Christoph Muller. Since that, I completed maintained the flying, and took some time out to complete my command on the 320. And then since that, I had another fortunate opportunity to become the fleet captain on the Airbus 320 for 2 years. And at the moment, I'm in People and Change, which is basically dealing with recruitment, change, a lot of change in the airline industry, particularly in Aer Lingus. It's come through a lot of change. And really just trying to liaise with cross departments as we move into the IAG umbrella.
Very good. And just because I was remiss in not introducing myself earlier. My name is Mark Hegarty. I am a director of Carmen Aviation, and Carmen Aviation is essentially providing professional and technical services leasing companies, specifically in the area of analysis and technical services, but also in personnel leadership development and professional development as well. So I suppose we get to the question, because we are tight on time. So I might start with you, Steve, if that's okay. the industry is growing, and Dick Forsberg commented earlier on how sort of resilient that growth has been and will continue to be in the next 20 years. What sort of personnel are most in demand in your organisation right now, and where do you see that going in the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's a good question. We have a graduate program that we're expanding. So from the airline industry is kind of unique, and it has most disciplines from IT to legal to the more obvious professions. So we're expanding our graduate program with DCU, and we're looking at other universities as well. So also from other industries as well. So it's very good to cross-pollinate the talent pool and the experience that's out there to bring it into our neck of the woods out of the airport. There's 4,000 staff at the airport, and you get a lot of, I suppose, healthy mix of new disciplines. And one of the advantages in Aer Lingus is you have opportunity, like myself, to move different departments and see things a different way. So it's difficult to get that balance right now, but we're in expansion mode at the moment. So there'll be a lot more opportunities to to identify the talent and secure the talent, and not just for short term but long term. A lot of expansion plans now, and with the aviation industry, you got to ride the wave when it's at the right position. So finding the talent is a key focus for us now.
Excellent. I'm going to jump to Kyle for a second, because Kyle, it just resonated with me that you talked about cross-pollination, and Kyle, you started on the mech eng side and then moved into the piloting and then into entrepreneurship after that. And so what type of person are you looking for now?
Those going in, well, we hear the numbers, the expansion, which is great to hear. You may have seen some of the statistics out there on, for example, number of pilots required by 2030, 97,000 just in Europe. Numbers coming out from Ryanair for flight crew, 600 and odd next year. But what people forget is that every one of those guys and girls has to be trained. You have to have a flight instructor behind them. So, and it's very difficult, as you can guess, that to keep someone to go up through the ranks as a flight instructor, from junior flight instructor to teaching multi-engine instrument rating over 3 or 4 years. It's very difficult to keep people, but it's very good experience. There's a lot of hours, skills that are earned over those 3 or 4 years, and a lot of the airlines are taking it on board when you go for an interview. The other critical thing when we bring anybody in to do the flight training is, and you've heard it here numerous times earlier this morning, is attitude. We're teaching people not to be just a pilot or a co-pilot. It's you're training from day one for them to take command of an aircraft. And we've seen in the last couple of years, again with the expansion, and just to take the idea behind Ryanair, for example, we're hearing people reaching the 1,500 hours that are required to unfreeze your ATPL and getting offered command. So 3.5 years to command, and there's guys and girls going in there at 18 years of age. So by 21, 22, they could be in the left seat flying a 737-800.
Fascinating. Emmett, you also are involved in developing instructors to provide that sort of critical mass of expertise that can develop the next generation. Can you talk about, the type of personnel you're looking for, not just for the cadet jobs, but also for the instructional jobs?
Well, I suppose the characteristics are maybe universal across both groups, in that in the Air Corps maybe we're slightly unique in one way, that we'll take a school leaver, we'll take a graduate. It doesn't matter to us in particular. Technical competence is a given, I would say, okay, and that including critical thinking, etc. Not technical knowledge per se, but the capacity for technical competence. But where we do really try and hone in and find in both our potential cadets and instructors is leadership potential. A far harder thing to latch onto, because unique from other places, we bring people in and we train them for immediate positioning after training to essentially go into middle management. So we look for the potential for leadership development. How we then develop that after that is through access to leadership opportunities from a very, very early stage in their careers. So that I would identify as the number one thing that we seek, and that doesn't have to be come into an interview and saying you were, captain of your football team. Invariably, when we get like 8 people who are captain of the same football team, when we have interview processes, but a lot of people maybe don't recognise their own potential for leadership. And you can engage in the debate about born versus made, but it's a mix of both. There's innate, characteristics that are there, but a lot of leadership can be developed through the right, processes, opportunities, and access to experiences. That's how you can develop as a leader.
It's something that you've all touched on in different times with the sort of the range of experiences that you each have and that cross-pollination is going on. Jeremy, as someone in ATC, how does is that an advantage to you that someone has been other places, whether that be in the military or otherwise?
Yeah, well, I suppose having been in other places is an indication of versatility, and I think someone who's versatile is able to cope with the change that you need to be able to cope with as anyone operating at the technical end of the aviation industry with new technology and stuff. So I think if someone has a wide range of experience and they've operated in different environments, whether that's in Barrett's shoes shop followed by a bar, followed by any sort of experience, anything that involves people skills and versatility, I think are really important. And I suppose if we're selecting air traffic controllers, we're looking for those sort of skills, communication, the ability to handle pressure, versatility, and really just that the individual is a cultural fit to the organisation. Sometimes people might be great in a particular area, but they might necessarily fit the culture, the ethos of the organisation or the subsection within which they've applied to,
Grod, in the phrase ethos and culture has resonated with me again in the way Dermot described it there, but is there a particular difficulty in terms of developing people in the short term to reach a sufficient standard but in a very short space of time, and how do you deal with that in IFI?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's quite difficult. I suppose from our company's point of view, we're quite small, so when I'm answering the question, I'll talk about it from the bigger picture point of view, and that there's so many roles and so many jobs that are going to now start to arise within the drone industry and the ORPAS remotely piloted aircraft industry. The difficulty is that if we keep trying to apply the old system, the system that we've learned in aviation is over 100 years old, and it would make common sense to apply the lessons learned there to unmanned aviation. However, the industry is very, very different for a number of reasons. But even looking at it exclusively from the piloting point of view, currently there are no, bar a few, there are no piloting jobs out there. To become a pilot, you have to become an operator similar to Aer Lingus, Ryanair, or the Air Corps. So there's a whole business aspect to it, and it ties back to what was said this morning about continued development and the desire for continued education, because with an industry that's so fresh, so new and so dynamic, if you're not willing to engage in that process and continually learn and continually adjust, well then you're simply not going to find yourself as a first mover in this industry, and you'll have to wait. So if it's an industry that does appeal to you in some way, the answer from a short-term point of view is you have to have, as Jimmer said, that versatility and that desire to engage with that learning process.
You can hear a lot of the same sort of undercurrents are there throughout all the panels today, and you'll see them that it's about attitude. It's not about qualification necessarily. It's about competence or the ability to gain experience later. Stephen, if someone arrives in Aer Lingus, what can they expect in terms of opportunities for that sort of development in lifelong learning? I know you yourself have had huge opportunities, but what can someone arriving in as a graduate, as one of these guys here tomorrow morning, in the next couple of years, what can they expect?
Not specifically for piloting, no?
No, in general terms.
Yeah, well, as mentioned earlier, I was fortunate to be given a higher education, completed an MBA and a degree, and that's widespread across the organisation. So if they go seeking that support, they will get it. So we have a very more robust programme now for further education and training. And with the graduate programme mentioned earlier on, there's 6 months in one department, 6 months in another department, and really, it's up to you. You mentioned attitude and resilience as well, but also, determination to learn more and to challenge yourself and to really push yourself out there, and that will be embraced over the course of the 6 months, and you'll be spotted, and that many students are retained on a more longer term and given more challenges and more placements as well. So you can be left to your own devices to a certain extent, and you'll be pushed as far as beyond your comfort zone, I suppose, and that's what we all want really, with the right support and right mentoring. So we have a good, strong mentoring program as well. in the organisation, so that we're developing that all the time, you know, in line with the values that we try to live up to as well, that we hold, you know.
Very good. Kyle, specifically in AFTA, you spoke about the opportunity for rapid growth, and particularly the numbers of people coming out later on. But how do you maintain a standard across that, and how do you provide for opportunities? So to take the step from today to 5 years from now.
Yeah, it's a bit of a conundrum. Yeah, how can you the numbers that are required? We're getting airline contracts where they're needing a large number of pilots. How do you maintain standards? Well, it's down to the training of the trainer. So it's all about the instructors, standardization, but also new technologies coming in. We've now electronic training record systems. Our ground school manuals are now all on iPad Air. Everything is accessible by the students over the web. Even down to the technology within the aircraft. They're moving on from the old, as we call it, iron dial system to the new EFIS, the glass cockpits, use of GPS. And even in the simulators themselves, to bring the overall cost down of training a pilot, they're now using advanced fixed-base simulators, which reduces cost dramatically, but also allows more training time to go on in these things. They break down less. And of course, if you're reducing the amount of breakdowns and the amount of hours that are put into a machine, one of these machines can run 22 hours a day. You're maintaining your standards and keeping costs low. And again, it's the old conundrum in any business. All airlines, even us as trainers, we're in it to make money. But it's the balance between, as you say, quality versus economies of scale.
Very good. You referenced technology, which is exactly my next question to the next guys. Just in terms of Emmett, in terms of when you started training both in UL prior to the Air Corps and in the Air Corps itself, how has technology impacted not just the type of training you do, but the delivery of that training?
Well, when I started training UL, I didn't have a mobile phone, so that's a good indication. Absolutely, I have to put my hand in the air and say that we're possibly a step behind Kyle and Atlantic. In fact, we've visited them recently, and we're only in our process of integrating a lot more technology into our training system itself. Where we have, I won't call it an advantage or a bit more freedom, is the fact that we're not quite under the same commercial pressure that Kyle is, that we have the opportunity to maybe apply our standard and stick to it outside of the normal pressures of how we operate. But technology, is key. Again, it's the way it's going. It's part of the government development plan in terms of what way the country is going. I know they've rolled out 200 million to put technology into primary schools. It mightn't be, 200 million. It mightn't be really. It's probably way too little. But the students we're going to get in 5-10 years are going to be at a completely different level than maybe where we are now. And again, linking back to what everyone has discussed already in terms of continual development, the onus is on us to ensure that everyone involved in any training system to meet the demands of the future is kept abreast, trained, and up to date. Embracing the change and really making sure that it's used to maximum effectiveness to ensure that what's appropriate now in terms of training mightn't be appropriate. You have to adapt to the realities of how individuals actually learn themselves in the future, and our students of the future are going to be different than how we learned, essentially, and it's up to us to adapt to that.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think we need to be careful as well of the technology, the advanced towards technology. Well, it's fantastic training aid, really is, and access to information is fantastic. We also, we're talking about the next generation coming through, and we have the fly-by-wire aircraft, and we've noticed we've been trying to maintain the basic airmanship principals in the flight ops department, we put a lot of effort and training into upset recovery at high altitude, where as a trainee pilot, and I know we're moving to MPL as well, but as a trainee pilot you practice stalls and steep turns, usually at low level at a reasonable speed. What we're seeing now with the recent accidents is, obviously Air France 447, how do you deal with the startle effect if something goes wrong at a high altitude? You don't have much of a margin for error. There's a very, very tight window there. And equally, then on the ground, over-reliance on technology, even in the office as well, you can't forget that interpersonal skill, and I would concern, I feel a bit old saying this, but I would have concern for the next generation come through. They need to show that they've worked in teams and they've worked in dynamic teams and are able to have a discussion, an argument, think outside the box and not just off the iPad box, So that sounds a little bit of a Luddite, I did fly the 146, so I know, there wasn't much computers involved in that aircraft, but I think we have to get that balance right, so the rush towards technology has to be tempered a little bit.
Sorry, Emmett.
I actually completely agree, and there's a massive danger in which we all probably experience now with the modern age is actually information overload, where I think they're quite good in the likes of modern aircraft in terms of controlling what you have to interact with, but on an organisation level it's quite common, for example, with your iPad, your electronic flight bag, where the document's sent to you, and once you open it, it's essentially signed as read. And I know for a fact I get a lot of emails that I read, and you could probably ask me an hour or two later what was in it, and I probably haven't processed that information. And there's a significant danger that, the onus, I think, is on the people pushing the information to ensure that it is as digestible for the human system as possible to make the effect that it's meant to have on the line, which is always going to be improved safety.
Yeah, we've an electronic flight pad on board as well, and just the move towards that iPad. The older captains I used to fly with would be very resistant towards that. And I think there's something in that, because the wrong information into the system, the wrong information comes out, and also in the Airbus and 737 as well now, following the line, but the situational awareness has to be maintained as well. Where are you, and what happens when when you lose something, or an instrument, or the information coming in? Not just blindly trust it, and to challenge that. So again, as you say, getting that balance is important and difficult.
I think the technology often acts to do exactly what it was trying to assist with, in that we look at the percentage of accidents that have human error, and we say between 60, 70, 73%. It's massive, so we try and compensate a lot of those systems by investing in the technology, but often that technology actually creates or widens the disconnect between the operators, whether that's a pilot, whether that's an engineer, whoever that is in the system, the human in the system. It widens that gap, and even to the point where we say, well, pilots cause all these CFIT accidents. Let's take the pilots out of the aircraft. We look at unmanned aircraft in terms of the cockpit environment, and that's fine. That's a really easy solution. But who says that the machine is going to do it better? And it's not an unmanned aircraft. Remember, it's a remotely piloted aircraft. The aircraft still has human interaction at some level, and we can keep pushing that further and keep disconnecting that. But at some point, somebody is sitting in a room monitoring a screen. Now, if you've taken them out of the environment, they can't feel that the aircraft is stalling. They can't interact with that system in the same way. It's much more likely that they're going to fall asleep, because now their life doesn't depend on managing the system.
Well, even from a passenger perspective, I don't know about you, but of course I'm been wedded to traditional piloting in many cases myself, but I wouldn't really feel comfortable as a passenger without someone on board who had some skin in the game in terms of whether this thing's going to make it or not. But Jeremy, I think in terms of technology making things safer, air traffic control has seen sea changes in the way that systems have interacted with the coupons and a few other bits and pieces.
Yeah, I think I'd completely echo the sentiments of Steve and Emmett. The irony with automation is that it hands it back to the human when there's a problem, and you're sort of trying to limit the human interaction, because the human is generally the person that makes the mistake. But the more you do that, the less the person is able to take over in the event of something happening. I think that Air France 447 is probably a good example of where the human just misinterpreted the data. The computer was flying the machine, and the pilot wasn't able to recover what would normally be considered a fairly simple, a simple situation to recover from. Obviously, there are huge benefits to automation in terms of the increase to safety, because you remove the human. And I think simulation, and that was, I suppose, the original thing. Simulation allows you to minimise the amount of time you spend on the line or in front of a screen with a student, and limit the exposure of the general public to someone under training. and obviously recreate things that can happen in real life in a simulated environment where people can learn from their mistakes. So I think it contributes greatly in that regard, you know.
Very good. Kyle, we spoke earlier about resilience and how do you develop whether it be a candidate or an instructor who is able to react to adverse events and still maintain normal operations, and how do you do that in Atlantic, and how do you think it should be done?
Yeah, well, if I can just go back to the Air France situation, I think, you know, as an initial trainer, you'll hear these terms coming out, upset recovery training. We've always done it. It's always been in the training. We've always trained for stalls and everything like that. I think it goes back, and no matter what field you're working in, it always goes back to what you were first taught. If you weren't taught the skills to begin with, you will never have the skills no matter how much technology you bring into it. So even though we've things helping us do things every day, like cars and things, you get all these lane assist and everything, you still got to be able to drive the car at the end of the day, which means at the beginning you should have been taught correctly how to drive the car. The same with the airplane. It's been lost a bit because, again, I think financial pressures, time pressure has said, look, we need to train these guys faster. So we'll cut that bit out. We don't need to do that bit anymore because the aircraft will look after that. I think what we're doing now is we're going back and we're re-looking at the whole thing and saying, no, even though technology has come in, you still need, as we would call them, the stick and rudder skills, because when you do get that, and again, it's what Steve says, we've just designed an upset recovery training. It's the startle effect. And when you're under the startle effect, the thing that you do is you go back to what you were first taught. So if you were first taught the recovery the correct way or to do the correct thing, then that's the way you should be trained. So it all goes back to the training at the beginning. And we're seeing that for most of the airlines that we're looking at. It's back to get the basics covered and then slowly bring in technology that will assist you as you're flying. You know, and Steve will probably agree with me, flying a large airliner these days at the front with the technology, you don't do much flying anymore. You're managing a hotel because they're just sitting down the back, eating, sleeping, drinking, watching movies, you know, and the airplane's flying itself, and now you're a manager. But when all goes wrong, the technology switches off, you got to get back to stick and rudder skills that you first learned day one. Mm-hmm. So that again is where we're saying that not only have you to have the ability to fly the aircraft, you have to have managerial qualities as well. And again, through any training, we should try and get that more involved, that it's not just flying the aircraft. It's not just learning how to maintain or do maintenance on an aircraft or an engine. It's the maintenance of how everything runs, the day-to-day things, the communication. I know where it's going to come up working as part of a team, but also being able to work alone. And again, that's going to come on later on. You've got to be able to do both, because as we've seen, I think, again, in the news over the last couple of days, we've seen a lot of pilot incapacitations and things, you know, for illness or whatever. Well, I think more and more of those are coming out, but they always happened. They were always there. And at some point, you'll be sitting in the cockpit and you'll look around and the other guy's unconscious or something like that, and you're on your own. So not only have you got to be able to work as a team, you got to be able to manage as well. And again, it's becoming a big part of any of the training we're doing.
Okay, very good. Funny enough, both Emmett and Kyle touched on something, Stephen, that I'd be interested to ask you about, which was the commercial pressure. And I know in Emmett's case we spoke before about how even the Air Corps was told to cut back the number of sim training hours in certain types due to budget cutbacks with the financial crash. And how much commercial pressure is acceptable, I suppose, on the first side of it? And second of all, how do you deal with that in terms of developing people and keeping people current?
I think it depends on your leadership in your flight ops department. Well, it's important anyway. I mean, it's the job of the CFO to push and to ask and what is essential and what is absolutely needed. So, you know, we've been asked the question, and pretty much every year, do you really need that extra recurrent training sim? Does it have to be 4 hours every 6 months? And, you know, I think depending on the culture, somebody mentioned culture earlier on, getting the right cultural fit for the candidates coming in and working their way up is very important to know where we're coming from, but also always challenging your own norms. Like, do we really need that? But ironically, we've just sent over our main instructors, our chief instructors, and some other instructors to Amsterdam to actually do a 3-day upset recovery course. And there's once you justify why we're doing it and the logic behind it, and then it can percolate down through the rest of the organisation, the other instructors, and we're using the iPad. So there's a balance there. We're using an iPad app to educate the pilot, and he or she can find that information and dive as much as deep as he or she wants to go into it. So I think it's healthy for the organisation. The industry is so competitive and so cyclical. It has to be challenged. Every decision has to be challenged. Do you really need that type of a turnaround? Do you really need that length of a turnaround, be it on the Atlantic? We're going to the West Coast now as well. So you're challenging all those norms, and that's where you need the strong leadership to have robust discussion to defend the position, but not just blindly stick with the status quo either. So you need a bit of healthy debate all the time. Very good.
I think as well, Mark, that effective regulation probably comes into it as well to temper the commercial interests. If there's a strong regulatory structure there with minimum standards that have to be maintained, it helps the flight operations staff maybe to be able to hold something up and say, look, we absolutely need to do this, or it's part of our a safety management system, and we've identified a risk here. This is the mitigation, and we need to apply this solution. So regulation and safety management probably come into it a lot as well, and can provide that support and push back against any.
I think regulation is your safety net.
Your baseline.
It's your baseline really. And not to speak for other airlines, but it depends on the characters in each department challenging each other and representing and looking forward, not just to the next quarter or the next budgetary year, but what are we doing in 5 years? What are we doing? Where are we going? What are the challenges we're going to encounter? What type of pilots are we bringing into the organisation, and cabin crew as well? How are we training them in their safety emergency procedures and the communication, the CRM that Kyle mentioned earlier on? How are we interacting together and managing that? I suppose that hotel that the guest is comfortable but also safe.
Very good.
I think there's a certain amount, and it's a huge amount. It relies a lot on the airline, and yes, the airline has to say this is the amount of training we do. This is what we recommend. But I suppose for you guys, it's also important to remember, particularly from the pilot's point of view, but also in any of those streams as you work your way from the bottom up, that you need to remember that you have to decide what you think is safe based on your experience, and you have to try and get as much experience as you can and make sure you bring that forward, because it's not good enough to turn around and say, well, the company's going to keep me safe, or the regulators are going to keep me safe. You need to look at the specific tasks that you're being asked to carry out and you're being rewarded financially to carry out, but decide, is this safe? Is this the best way to do it? And if not, then it's your responsibility to raise your hand, and don't rely on somebody else to do that for you.
I have to say I agree with that, especially from an aircraft point of view. We're in the unique situation of being the operator and also the regulator, whether you think that's a good idea or not. But it does have consequences, and we're talking about pressures. Absolutely, my response to that is always training and keeping safe is expensive. Try having an accident, and fortunately we have experience within the Air Corps of having accidents, and it's not a good position to be in. And as Grode said, we rely on individual interaction with the regulation well, because anyone working there can actually have a physical impact on shaping the regulation for better or worse. So there's a responsibility and onus on everybody that works with us to engage with it as much as possible.
I want to ask one last question, and it's really to put these guys on the spot for a second, and that's that we hear a lot about the society of entitlement, and it goes back to Kyle had mentioned about attitude at the start, and the guys have mentioned about how you carry yourself in an organisation. But what challenges do you see for your own organisation in terms of the next generation? How are you going to deal with people who are both used to getting access to information quickly and also getting responses from organisations that might necessarily be set up that way, whether it be hierarchy or airline or training organisation?
I've seen it at a first-hand level. There's two real type of drones. There's the traditional aircraft that we all know, and you take the pilot out, and now we have an unmanned aircraft. But from the bottom, and it's creating a massive industry, is COTS, or commercial off-the-shelf drones. So small drones that are used for video work or geospatial areas, or any sensor you can put in the air without a pilot or remotely pilot it. And one of the issues is the technology is too advanced. People take these aircraft out of a box and they fly. And they realize within minutes that they're able to fly this thing, and suddenly they think that they have a skill. And you don't learn a skill by carrying out an action that takes 10 or 20 minutes, but they feel that they've learned a skill. And even some of the commercial operators who are operating in this country today, if their niece or nephew bought a toy drone or got one for Christmas, as in one that cost 20 or 30 euro, and handed it to them, they would be afraid to fly it because they don't have the fundamental skill to fly a 20 euro toy, but they feel that they call themselves pilots and operate these larger drones because they've never invested in their own training, and you really, really have to guard against that, I think.
I'd echo that. For a start, I don't think as a generation it's any different. I think every generation will always have something to say for the generation coming behind. Same for everyone. But I think the biggest challenge is no more than some people said, earlier on, you're going for an interview, as a basic, know something about the company. And you can get on the website and you can get that in 5 minutes. But we're in the age of instant access to information, okay? So it sets you up for a lot of bluffing, basically. You can get on Google, you can have the answer like that. But unfortunately, it's not always the answer or the information that's actually the thing to look for in terms of development. It's the process you go through, and something kind of gained and a learned or a skill or a competency, learned through a process is gonna stick better and going to be more effective. I'm not saying that I think everyone should have to do it the old way, because I had to do it, but it's just recognise the fact that is a danger, that instant access to information without the process, in line with what Grode was saying.
If I could just say to everybody, there are no shortcuts. If you take one at the beginning, you're more than likely going to get caught at some stage. You have to put the time in. You got to put the effort in. One big thing that we're having issues with is the theoretical knowledge. You will do the question bank. Yeah. So everybody's handed digital books, and they sort of say, well, can I shortcut this? Well, okay, I'll go online, I'll search through Google or whatever, and I'll find what we all refer to as the question bank. And the guy or girl will sit there and they'll go through 10,000 questions over 3 or 4 weeks. And then they'll go into the exam and they'll come out going in shock, going, only half of them were on the question bank, the rest of them I didn't know. Or you will get the person that will, it was great, 90% of them were on the question bank, the other ones I guessed. But even that person will get caught, because quite often what we do is we do an interview and we'll start asking the questions and dig a little deeper, and can you explain that? Can you go to the next level? And we have heard, I don't know whether it's a story out there, but there was one kid that went into an interview for an airline and they were asked a question on the principles of flight of an aircraft, and it said, sorry, I don't know that, it wasn't on the question bank.
Did you get the job?
Well, he's now putting together the question bank. But no,
he's an instructor now.
Yeah, he's an instructor. There are no shortcuts. You got to put the time and effort in. You got to do the study. Where you get the information from it doesn't matter, but you got to put the time in. There aren't any shortcuts in any of the fields, be it going for degrees in engineering, maintenance, going for flight training. Anything you do, you got to put the time and effort in.
Guys, I'm really sorry to cut us off. It was just we're very tight on time, and I had questions on entrepreneurs and questions on learning. But I think we'll get a couple of questions on the floor before we finish. But I think it was some Greek philosopher whose name escapes me now says the right question is a sign of the right thinking, and that probably captured a lot of what we said earlier. So if you have any questions on the floor, then we might try and polish off this. Somebody must have a question.
Don't put them under pressure.
Under pressure, yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
This one's for Dermot. How do you think that with increased integration of GPS and ADS-B in aircraft, how do you think that will affect things like oceanic clearances in Shanwick and Ballygreen?
Well, I think I was actually visited Ballygreen a number of weeks ago, and I was surprised to see that they're actually setting up a facility to recover lost aircraft as a result of the Malaysian occurrence. I think the operations in Ballygreen are going to change drastically over the next probably 10 to 15 years. I was assured by the station chief down in Ballygreen that he'd been hearing that since 1970, and that nothing had really changed since then. But with ADS-B, with Mode S, HF rebroadcast transmission won't be a thing of the future with CellCal and with all of these different communication techniques that you can communicate with traffic even if it's halfway over the Atlantic, obviously the navigation equipment on board the aircraft as well. So I think Ballygreen will probably morph into something different and probably remain as a backup in case of all of the other systems failing. Does that answer your question? Yep.
I have a question for, well, everyone on the panel. It's just we've been talking about today a lot about the advancement in technology in terms of iPads replacing manuals and such, fly-by-wire and all these kind of things. Do you think that's kind of increased the threat and vulnerability and security to aircraft and the aviation industry in general? Or has it made it more secure?
That's the exact sort of question.
You better pick someone.
That's the exact sort of question we're looking for.
I think I suppose everybody's looking at me to start off and see what holes I can dig for myself. I think the automation is a good thing. It releases capacity to the crew and to everybody else to manage, as Kyle said again, to manage the situation, the operation. If you're talking about, I might be off base here now, but you're talking about hacking into the aircraft or something like that, I wouldn't have any concerns around that from what I know. No, I think it's a positive. It's ultimately, I mean, across the globe, right, there's the training is very important, and training varies across the globe, to be honest, and even in Europe. So, getting the right talent in at the very start, and we have a cadet program, or you have a direct entry program, or you have a contractor program, getting the right person, the right cultural fit, the right organizational fit, to be happy to come to work and to work with the people they're working with, is, I think, the most important. The most important part is the brain, the two brains in the front of the airplane, and then the team that's behind that, behind the door and on the ground. So for spotting those things that come up, usually error 404, that's no good if you're at your cruise altitude across the Atlantic. So to be able to cope and deal with events that change quickly, and have the confidence to go back to your training, confidence in your training, and thinking about problem solving and stuff like that. So that's all about the interview, the selection process, how we select these young people coming through is very, very important, I believe.
I have to say, in relation to maybe a more flying-related element, like I was the last class I trained on our older aircraft, the SL Marchetti, so all steam-driven dials, etc. But I was involved very early on when we got the PC9, which is basically a glass cockpit. But I have to say, the level at which we're able to output a student in terms of competence is way above what I maybe would have experienced myself. And on top of that, even with like the glass cockpit, unfortunately we don't have an autopilot, it's all hands-on. But even when I lose all the primary instruments, the backup is, you can probably fly better on it because it's everything's there and it's a smaller scan. Whereas before, doing partial paneling in the old aircraft was an interesting experience where you're most likely to be in serious risk if you didn't have an instructor sitting beside you. But it's definitely, I would think, helped us in terms of that. In terms of threats to the future, I don't know, I definitely have seen an increase in the quality and competence of our output.
I think that's something that Ralph had referred to earlier as well, in terms of looking for the best people, the best minds, the best ability, not just in piloting or in air traffic controlling, but in everything from programming to handling customers, and that the ability to produce the best is of critical importance. And we had all touched on it earlier with the requirement to maintain standards at a sufficiently high level, that complex system of systems is able to operate and have a sufficient skill set and resilience in the people that form the hubs of those systems to keep us all safe. Guys,
you can put lipstick on a gorilla, but it's still a gorilla,
Is that a reference to me or someone else?
No.
But guys, thanks very much to Emmett, to Kyle, to Garrod, to Dermot, and to Steve. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you very much.